Hi, folks. Thanks for tuning in for the first Harpoon Books digital event. Today, we are celebrating the one-year anniversary of our debut title, Emily is Sometimes the Forest Wants to Fire, by Ohio poet Darren Demaree. This book has been just an absolute pleasure to work on, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. Darren is easily the hardest working poet I've probably ever met, and we're so incredibly pleased to have him on our press. Today, we're joined by a special guest, Donna Vorreyer. Donna is the author of 3 poetry books from Sundress Publications, To Everything There Is, which is forthcoming this year, Every Love Story is an Apocalypse Story, and A House of Many Windows. Her poems and reviews have appeared widely in print and online, and she is currently serving on the editorial staff for Rhino Poetry. Recently retired from a 36-year career as a public middle school teacher, she resides in Ohio with her husband and 2 dogs. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them and let her go.
That was awesome, except I'm in Chicago and not in Ohio.
We gotta give her.
Ohio. Oh, I got my word mixed up. Okay.
That's all right. Gary, you and I are a little focused right now. That's all right.
Yeah.
Focused on Ohio.
Yeah.
So thank you for inviting me to talk to Darren about this book. I love this book. I love the Emily poems. Before they were a book, kind of was an avid stalker of them online whenever they would come out. You know, oh, there's a new Emily poem. And I think that I've gone back to the collection multiple times, you know, over the past year since it's been a book. And I think I want to start by saying, you know, one of the things that brings me back to the poems over and over again is the rapt attention that is paid to the moment in each of those poems. Not just to the person that they're being addressed to, but the details of the moment. And they're not, you know, momentous moments is a bit redundant. They're not always, you know, dramatic moments in the course of a life. Very often they're very ordinary moments, like the most ordinary moments. But the attention that is paid to them, I think for me as a reader is what brings me back to them. And I've heard a lot of people, you know, talk about it as a book of love poems, but I think they are. But I think to me, they're much more than that. So I guess my first question that I would ask you is, you know, how would you categorize them if someone asked you, you know, what are the Emily poems? How would you answer that question?
Yeah. Well, these came out of a result of being frustrated with the love poems that I'd liked when I was younger. I was a big Anne Sexton and Robert Creeley fan, and Anne Sexton's work holds up much better for me now than the Robert Creeley poems. But even the great love poems he wrote, it was statue and pedestal stuff, and the women weren't really interesting. Even, you know, The Whip, one of my all-time favorite poems, it's mostly about his reaction as an impetus to these 2 women having to deal with being in love with him, which to me is incredibly boring. And so I wanted to find a sort of love poem where it was about the action, however small the action might be, and how this couple, and some of it is very factual and very based on life, and some of it's completely made up. But how these small moments can spiral into big things and big decisions and things to hang on to. So for me, it was always about the impetus of action and how we had to deal with the action. As soon as it becomes about the statue or the pedestal or some mixture of that, it sort of loses my interest. And Emily is far more fascinating in both reality and unreality than anything like that to me.
I think it's interesting that, you know, although I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, that we basically said opposite things. You know, you're saying that they're poems of action, and I'm talking about them being poems of kind of this almost meditative,
well, it's
kind of deep
small
observation.
Yeah, it's those daily things that ultimately accumulate into action. But the choosing to stay, the choosing to help, the choosing to have discussions. There's a lot of those poems where discussions are being had,
right?
And they're small things that can become big things or stay small. Some of my favorite ones are the moments where I can find some bit of humor. I think writing any sort of humor in poetry is one of the biggest challenges. The people that do it well, yeah, it confounds me that people can do it well a lot. So finding those small moments that you're talking about and having them mean much bigger things and being descriptive and being accurate and finding the ways that they can fit together into a whole relationship. Really unimagined.
Right. Well, I think that's an important thing that we talk about as poets always, is that, yes, there's always something real, but
Sure.
it's not you're not transcribing your conversations. I don't think your wife would appreciate that very much. Although I'm sure she appreciates the poems. But if I'm not mistaken, you're still writing these poems, right? Because I think I've seen some new ones online that are not in the book.
These are what I go back to. This is the closest thing to my voice. But then I'll go back, and I've been working a lot with prose poems now without punctuation and different things like that, a lot of political things. The manuscript that I've just finished was all political sequences and prose poems and things like that. And that's a type of thing I have to work to get to. And then once I finish a project, I'll go back and I'll write Emily poems for a little while as almost a palate cleanser. Like, I know that that's how I sound when I'm doing my best, but I love to experiment so much that I'll go back and forth.
Yeah.
So
you know
right
that
now,
world.
Yeah. It's comforting. I know I do them well. When you're taking big chances on like sequence prose poems things, it's big swings, and I don't know that I'm doing that well. So I'll go back and I'll write Emily poems. Like right now I'm writing a series of Emily as I prepare the meal kit poems. This has brought us, we've been doing a weekly meal kit.
Okay.
And there's nothing sort of more now and family and Emily centric than these meal kits we're making 3 and 4 times a week, because we can't leave the house.
Right.
So it ties all of that back in, and that's what I've been working on most recently. But
right. And since you mentioned a couple of your other projects, this idea of writing a series of poems, often with similar or the same title, is not new to your work.
No.
We have the Sweet Wolf poems from 2 Towns Over. We have this If There's a River sequence, which is newer, right? We have the Clawing at the Grounded Moon sequence. It Ain't a Choir, right? You have a whole bunch of poems that are written kind of in this series mode, or with the same title and numbers. And I wonder if you talk a little bit about that process, like what draws you to using the same title. Is the title something that you feel resonates with a theme that you're trying to show in all of the poems, and so it's a way to connect them? Or talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. What the origin of the title thing is, it when I was in grad school, I had all of my instructors come up and tell me that I couldn't title a poem to save my life. They're like, these poems are great, but this title doesn't work at all. So for a while, it was a safe place to go and repeat titles. And what I found was I fell in love, especially with the long sequences, with different ideas and forms of language that I wanted to meditate on. Some of them took on their own tones, like the Trump as a Fire Without Light sequence that was 702 poems long. Obviously, that was less of a meditation and more of a rage.
A reaction.
Yeah. But the ones like If There's a River, which is a meditation on God and religion. It Ain't a Choir, which is about protest and individual voices trying to rise to meet the moment and things like that. Those really are taking the title and trying to think about those ideas in small and big forms over and over again. The Emily As titles, and repeating that, was just the formula that I came up with to explore different parts of things and different parts of the relationship. It allows me to sort of approach any topic. If I start it with the Emily As, I can go into any part of our life and try to explore it. And it immediately gives me an entryway into almost anything, and creates that comfort zone where I feel strong and able to approach the subjects just starting with that title.
Yeah, and the titles are troublesome for a lot of people, including me. And I think what I love so much about the Emily As title, I love the Emily As titles because when I reviewed your book, I basically used all of your titles to review your book.
Which is fantastic.
Though those titles say so much without even the poems. which is a little bit of a different effect than some of the other series where the title remains the same and is numbered. Where when I'm reading those, I'm kind of trying to, I'm always looking for, the connection of that particular poem to that title.
Well, I think that comes from the Emily poems are all written individually, and it's something I do a lot of. The sequences are things that I will map out.
Okay.
So this will be a 92 poem thing. Here's when I want to speed things up. Here's when I'm going to work on this. Here's when I want to stress language and things like that. So I will completely map out how I want those to work, and they work in concert together.
Okay.
Not word for word, but I've got goals I'm trying to get to and things I'm trying to accomplish in different loops and arcs.
So those are projects that are planned almost more like the mapping of a narrative, where you're kind of laying out where you think you might want to go and how long that might take.
One of our mutual friends, Hannah Stevenson, at a certain point asked me about it, and I put one of the things I took from having a lawyer father was I used yellow legal pads, and I kept putting up different pictures of it on Twitter so people could see how the ideas and themes would work, and then how I would build and purposely lose energy in different sections.
Okay. So
I have my own shorthand for how I want it to work, and then different themes and ideas I want to integrate as those sequences develop.
And that also speaks a lot to me. You are prolific. You are always, there's always a project, and there's always stuff coming out online. Sometimes, there's this book, and you have several. How many manuscripts right now that you're working on? 3 at least?
Yeah, I have 3 that are finished. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So can you talk maybe a little bit about your how when do you write? How do you write? I know you have kids. You have a busy life.
Sure.
Where in the day do you have like a routine? And maybe what has your writing life been like, during this time that we've been at home? Has it been much harder, I assume?
Well, I have been very lucky that 2 things happen in this time period, at least, where I got a wife, a partner that is able to help out and able to take over for hours at a time if need be. Like right now it's bedtime, which is why I'm now upstairs at the top floor.
Partying.
As the baby gets her bath and the dogs run around. And so that obviously helps a great deal. And she sort of knows, and we plan when people are going to be sort of the one in charge at that point.
Okay.
And the other thing that helps is I've got an older child that can also pitch in. But in terms of the routine, two things come from that. One, I've been the primary caregiver. So normally when Emily's at school, I've got at least 1 to 3 of the kids with me because the youngest is 2. And when she takes a nap, that's when I get a chance to write. And at none of those points am I not taking that chance to write.
Okay.
And the reason stems from the second thing. When I got sober, when I stopped drinking, I set up a routine that was workout based and writing based and all these things that I repeat every single day. So I don't write every single day, but the routine gets met where I produce new work almost every day. And if tomorrow I can't write, I get extra writing done today. Just as sort of, this is the old baseball player in me, where I want to do all the things that kept me sober yesterday again today. And that involves working out and letting my children's voices be the first ones that matter. And then finding time every day to produce new work. Now that leads me astray sometimes. That leads me into corners of sequences that don't work. It leads me working a lot on things that ultimately don't go anywhere, which is why I don't edit the sequences to exclude the numbers. I like anytime one of the books is a sequence book, I like to just remove the poems and get it to work the best that way, because I like to instill that threat of failure.
That's interesting.
Maybe not. I like to show that the
Well,
process took place.
that's the
Yeah,
reality.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. These didn't just all come like bursting out of your head in
Yeah.
perfection, in order. Yes.
And I try to make the book the best book it can, and the poems get edited individually. But instead of trying to get them to all work flawlessly together, I'll just yank whole poems out. And it'll jump from number 1 to number 5, and then number 6, and then number 9, and so on.
Do you find that you most times have a project or a sequence that you're working toward? Because I know that myself and a lot of people that I've talked to in the last few months is like we obviously have the time to write, but there hasn't been the impetus to, I don't know, for me at least, to think that anything that I'm writing right now it matters. Or, I've spent, after I lost my parents 2 years ago, and the book that's coming out is kind of a book of elegy, like it's very easy for me to get mired back in that kind of topic.
Right.
So are you always working toward a project, or are you some days just free writing or seeing what comes? Or
I'll do the free writing, and I've been coming back to a memoir thing that's not poetry occasionally. So right now I am doing the Emily poems, but I was working on, and I'm still going back to a little bit, this Ohio landscape thing that's about Ohio and COVID and the protests and different things like that. So I normally have something I'm working towards.
Okay.
It might not see the light of day. The So Much More manuscript I talked about has 8 or 9 different sequences in it that had relative success and a lot of great individual poems in them that I'm putting together in one larger thing, because maybe only one of them would work as an individual book. So I'm always working towards something, but it doesn't always work, and that's okay. There's a lot of things that sort of just get left behind, but the need to constantly produce is tied into something emotionally and mentally that came from the sobriety, and I know sometimes it works against me, and then a lot of times it works for me.
It's a structure that is comforting and helpful. Yeah. And I think that that's very often, there are a lot of people who do something like morning pages, or even something like bullet journals, where that routine is comforting. And I think that that's, for me, all these years kind of written in stolen moments, right? Because I was teaching, and then when my son was young, and home, it was always in between, in the car during guitar lessons, or after the papers got graded. And now that I have the time, I have to think about that idea of what kind of routine is going to be both comforting and successful for me. So it's interesting to hear how routine helps you in multiple ways, not just with your writing, but with other aspects of your life.
When I've got the 3 kids in the day, and Emily's gone at school, and I've got that little window to get some reading and some writing done, and then I've got to go work at the library when the library has workers in it.
Right.
It gets a little stressful sometimes, but I know that it is important to me by the end of the day to have done those things. And then I will feel much better at the end of the day because I did.
So you said you have 3 manuscripts right now. Are they circulating? Are they being revised? What's going on with those?
So Much More is all those political sequences. And then the other one is A Child Walks in the Dark. Those prose poems where I tell my daughter, I tell my son, I tell my children, which has probably been the most popular, other than the Emily As poems that I've done. And then I've got a third one, the Clawing at the Grounded Moon, which is about, it's almost sci-fi, where the moon crashes in the Midwest and we've got to deal with it. I
actually have a favorite one of those.
Oh, awesome.
It's number 80.
Okay, sure. But the idea of pulling something completely made up, and how would religion deal with it, and how would we deal with it, and how would the government do it? And it was fun to do something completely different. One of those wild swings of mine that maybe worked or maybe didn't work. We'll see.
Well, I think a lot of those are really successful. I really love those. Although I think it would be, I think we would be remiss celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Emily
Sure.
as if you didn't read some Emily poems, which I know that I would love to hear, and I'm sure everybody else would too.
Absolutely. I picked out 4 to read before we wrap up. Emily is elsewhere sunflowers. I've traveled to leave Emily presence in places she might be one day. If she's never there, then the yellow I've left behind will grow as a gift to the places that missed her. I was very glad you asked for that one. One of the friends of Gary and I, who works at the Book Loft, his name's TJ. We read that poem for TJ all the time. That's his go-to. All right. Emily has a book of endings for Leslie Harrison. I chose Emily because I know that if she chose me, I could prepare for death in a way that made my desperation to keep living something tangible. Now, with each child we have, I am cemented in the panic of the living. Now, since she keeps choosing me every morning, I am able to taunt mortality in a way that will leave claw marks in the fields of Ohio. How glorious it will be to be dragged from the living and to scream one name, to spit one name at my weakening grip, to expect the strength to return to me, just like the thousands of other times I've used her name to live longer. 2 more. Emily, as she dropped the lantern at my feet. I always wear cotton, just in case Emily needs me to go up in flames. I get to be the one that holds her fire. How tender of her to choose me from the crashing to burn just enough for her to lead our children to safety. How terrible it must be for a man to have less of a purpose than to be burned like me. And then the last one, and my favorite and Gary's favorite as well. Emily as a smile would have ruined the picture. There was one look, one picture of Emily in a bathtub right before we got married. She was traveling with her family. She was in Madrid or Paris or Istanbul. She had been gone for a couple of weeks, so I had been drunk for a couple of weeks. And she knew that I had been drunk for a couple of weeks. So she sent me a picture of her in the bathtub, one breast covered, hair in a way I'd never seen before, looking directly at the faucet. And so surely did the tatters of my world collected into a whole woman so beautiful that when I got the picture, I accidentally deleted the picture. I remember it clearly though, her face, elegant, angry that she didn't have her hands wrapped around the back of my head to pull me off the bottle. She wanted to bury me in her beauty, and that almost worked too well. I am sober. I don't have the picture. I have Emily. She looks at me now. Thank you. And thank you, Donna.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I love your work. I'm looking forward to whatever comes next.
I'm excited for your new book. When exactly is it coming out?
It should be out in November, I believe.
Awesome.
Is the timeline. And hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person soon at some point. But, until then, be safe and be well.
All right. You as well.